sometimes we can get into these really deep grooved relationship patterns that it feels as if the family member has us underwater, and that in order to get out from under that hand, get up, take a breath of fresh air, recalibrate, and then re-engage, taking a break seems to be the only option you have. Hey there, welcome back to the Mind Your Boundaries podcast, episode number 16. I'm your host and boundary enthusiast, Jessica Miller, and today we're unpacking how do you successfully take a break from an overbearing, overwhelming family member in order to salvage the relationship. Sometimes we can get into these really deep grooved relationship patterns that it feels as if the family member has us underwater, and that in order to get out from under that hand, get up, take a breath of fresh air, recalibrate, and then re-engage, taking a break seems to be the only option you have. And we're going to talk about how to successfully do that, because in this episode I'm going to share 5 key steps that if you miss it, you do risk damaging the relationship. Story time. Let me tell you about Alex. Alex grew up with Linda and George. Super great relationship, always very close. When she met and married Jordan, the 4 of them got along really well. In fact, when Jordan and Alex moved across the country, Linda and George would take their vacation time to come visit them. Bring in the grandkids, they visited more often, and their relationship was great until it took a dramatic shift when Linda and George retired. So they're retired, they're across the country from their family, and they're thinking, why would we stay here when we could live in the same town and see our grandkids more, and our daughter and our son-in-law? They asked them, and Jordan and Alex were like, oh my gosh, that sounds great. You could be closer to your grandkids. We could have some support, maybe get a date night once in a while. They were thrilled by the idea. They loaded up the U-Haul, sold a bunch of stuff, and moved in basically next door. What they didn't anticipate was how hard retirement would be on Linda and George. They were both high achievers, really well liked in their career, and when they didn't have a sense of purpose, they directed all of their energy onto this little family unit that Alex and Jordan had created. They were over all the time, almost every day of the week, showed up at every sports practice, every game, spent almost every weekend with them. They had opinions on everything. Sometimes the opinions came off as critiques, and Alex started to feel this change inside of her. Instead of feeling comfort and excitement, like to see her parents, she was starting to feel anxious and dread and lots of stress. Their conversations went from talking about their kids, talking about their dreams, talking about just fun things as a couple, to dwelling on how sick of Linda and George they were. So they tried to set boundaries. Linda and George resisted because they needed them. Like, they needed Alex and Jordan in the worst way. They didn't have anyone else in the community. They didn't have any sense of purpose. And so they just globbed on even tighter. And so because of that, Alex got to a place where she's like, I'm sorry guys, I need to take a break. In today's episode, we're going to talk about 5 reasons why you might consider taking a break, the 5 steps that you have to take a break successfully. We're also going to have communication tips, setting boundaries, what do you do with the boundary guilt, and I'm going to talk to you about the long-term game. It's not a quick fix. So once you take the break and then you reunite, it's all about management. In the comments, I would love to know, have you ever tried to take a break or even feel the need to take a break? Like, you felt like, yes, I feel like this family member has me underwater. And for the sake of our relationship, I feel like I have to take a break in order for me to get out from under that hand and take a breath of fresh air and just kind of recalibrate and kind of figure out, what boundaries do I need and what can this look like so it's healthier going forward? When is the right time to consider a break? Number 1, over-involvement. When a family member's constant presence starts to stifle your own ability to make decisions. Number 2, strain on your personal relationships. If you start to notice that you have a more strained relationship with your partner or your kids, all because of the external pressure from this family member, that's when you might consider a break. Number 3, emotional toll. You're starting to feel anxious, lose sleep, or every time you interact with them, you're feeling the effects of stress. They railroad your boundaries. So they go above and beyond to push the limit every single time. So even though you're holding the line, they're figuratively like a linebacker, is that what they are with football? And they're just like pushing you past your threshold all the time, challenging you. That might be a good time to step back so that they realize what they're doing. And number 5, constant criticism. When your actions and choices are fair game for constant critiques, it really makes you start to doubt yourself personally, professionally, and as a parent. Here are the 5 steps to successfully taking a break so that you can recalibrate and then re-engage. I'm gonna name these off and then I'll walk you through how Alex did it. Number 1, communication. Number 2, defining your goals. Number 3, setting parameters. Number 4, establishing boundaries. And number 5, openness to a dialogue. Okay, this is how Alex did it and the script she used with her parents. Number 1, communication. So Alex initiated a frank conversation with her parents, and she just expressed the need to have some space in order to preserve the relationship. And this is what she said. As we have shared before, our interactions have become very overwhelming. We believe this break could really help us all. It's not to blame anybody, but it's about finding a healthier way forward. Number 2, defining goals. So she shared her intention was not to sever ties and that it was to create a healthier dynamic. Her script was, our goal is to reduce the amount of stress we're feeling and find a healthier way to interact that feels respectful and supportive. Again, it's not to sever ties. Number 3, setting the parameters. Alex said she's opting for a temporary break with limited contact and that she wanted to lay out very clear expectations. And this is what she said. Let's take a 2-week break from seeing each other with no phone calls, and we can only text if it's an emergency. After 2 weeks, we'll send you an email with our thoughts and feelings. Number 4, establishing boundaries. So determining the level of interaction right away is a great idea before you even have the conversation so that you can explain to them what to expect and what you're expecting from them. And what she said is, because she knows her mom is a texter, she said, if we receive texts beyond what we agreed upon and it's not an emergency, I'm going to wait until the 2 weeks are over to respond to them. And this again is just to give us that space that we believe we all need right now. Number 5, openness to dialogue. Now, Alex knew that despite having firm boundaries, this involves them too. It's a relationship. So she wants them to be, her parents to feel comfortable as well. And so she said, I've suggested a 2-week break. How does that feel for you guys? If you have any concerns, let's discuss them right now and see if we can find some middle ground so that we respect both of our needs. This is a very big step that a lot of people choose to skip. I include this step because in couples counseling, let's say someone comes in and not to receive couples counseling, but to uncouple. So there's one person in the relationship where they want to uncouple, they want to separate, and I take them through these steps, but they don't want to do step number 5. And it's like, if you're in a relationship and you want that other person to be there after the break, you have to ask them, how does this feel? Does this work for you? Is this going to be healthy for you? It's a very necessary part in the 5-step process. Please don't skip it. And so she stated, is there anything that you want to have a conversation about right now? They did. So they were so involved with their grandkids, and Alex's family was all they had in that community that they were just panicked. What were they going to do for 2 weeks? What were they going to do if they couldn't see their grandkids for 2 weeks? Alex and Jordan had already anticipated this reaction and this question, and they decided it was totally fine for the grandparents to still come and enjoy the sporting events, but they were still going to stay with the 2 weeks where they're not going to talk, you're not coming over, but you can come to the sporting events, but that's it. Navigating boundary guilt. Hands up if you've ever set a boundary or even didn't set a boundary because of the thought of the boundary guilt. I know, but I want to assure you that the way you feel when you feel guilty, it's totally normal and it just means you care. That's not a bad thing. It's just saying, I care so much about my family. I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to let them down. That's all the guilt is. That's not a bad thing. And you always have to remember, like with Alex, she had to remind herself, I know I'm disappointing my parents right now, and I know they still love me. Both things exist at the same time. So she reassured herself that boundary guilt is totally normal, and my parents can experience two emotions at the same time. They can be disappointed in me, and they still love me. She also practiced or prioritized and upped her game for self-care during these 2 weeks. Now, did they come together and there was like a magic wand moment and Linda and George were plugged into their community? They had all of a sudden cards on Thursday, fun friends on Friday. They had all these other things set up so they didn't overly rely on Jordan and Alex. No. It was a rough reunion. Linda and George were very apprehensive. They were super nervous, but slowly but surely they got back into a new rhythm after Alex and Jordan laid out their boundaries and they showed them like the behavioral changes they were going to make to hold the line, and they just worked on it. It's really important to know this is the long game. Just because you take a break, it's not going to magically make it all better. It simply gives you a clear enough head to figure out, what the heck do we need to make this healthy so that our family is good and we can have a good relationship with this family member? That's all it does. And then the long game is maintaining and managing and holding the boundaries. Now, managing the boundaries, you're going to have to be flexible because boundaries evolve in time. The boundaries you need when your kids are little are not the same boundaries you need when they're in middle school. So having flexibility as you're maintaining them is very important as well. So this episode was all about understanding another tool in our boundary toolbox, which is sometimes we have a relationship in our lives that's very much like in a negative pattern, that it feels like the person is pushing us underwater. And the only way to make it better or to even like get out from under it to get our breath to try to figure out what would make it better is to take a break. Now, when I think of a break, I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think a month is a stretch. I think in 2 weeks of no contact, you can definitely like get to a place of this is what we need as a family. These are the boundaries we're going to set. These are the behavioral changes we're going to make in order to hold our boundaries, and you get it all figured out in 2 weeks for sure. But extend it much past like that 3 week part. I mean, I feel like that's kind of mean, especially if you have grandkids. So 2 weeks is kind of the sweet spot. Get to work, figure out like take your deep breaths, like take a breather for the first like 2 to 3 days, wash off the boundary guilt, and then get to work figuring out what would a healthier dynamic look like. And then once you're ready, re-engage, share, communicate, and then also explain to them how you're going to hold the line. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. Until we meet again, make sure you mind your boundaries.